Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of From the Ground Up, a University of Chicago public policy podcast produced here at the Harris School of Public Policy, University of Chicago. Today, we bring to you the second episode of our Rare Earth series. If you remember, in the first episode, we discussed what exactly rare earth minerals are and why do they hold such critical importance in their lives. And I remember Christian remarking that the rare earths are such an integral part of our lives that we use them on a day-to-day basis. They are part of certain critical infrastructures that are extremely important for our countries or for our economies. So today we'll be deep diving and sharing with you our insights about two industries that we have extensively researched. And by the end of the episode, we'll be evaluating that if these rare earth minerals and minings, while they are actually benefiting us and benefiting our lives, our economy, our society, are they actually coming at a grave, grave cost? So with this, let's go to the studio. And here with me is Christian Guyona,
Howdy.
Adidapo Aziz,
It is always good to be here.
and Hugo He.
Hello, everyone.
So, Yoga, we were discussing before the episode while we were researching the two industries that we would be exploring through the podcast today. Can you share with the listeners what those two industries are and how did we and why did we narrow them down?
Yeah, we kind of talked about it last episode that like rare earth is really important in a lot of the industry like glass, TVs, lamps, car batteries, mobile phone, laptop, and everything in our modern life today. But there's two industry that we kind of want to get into today, which is the EV productions and also the electronic of our daily life. And this is especially important first, electronic is what we use every single day and where Earth can have a big impact in this industry. And also EV for EV that is like kind of a hotspot in the clean energy transitions. And that's why I think that's why we just want to, talk more about this too specifically.
I think you're absolutely right, Hugo. I think EV especially is one of our vehicles, pun intended, to actually also pave our way and take us towards the decarbonization path. This is the tools that many countries, many companies are exploring to combat climate change effort also and try to address that to some extent. So that with that being said, Dapo, who do you think are the major EV players apart from Tesla? Because I think Tesla is a household name now. Everybody knows about it. It would be interesting to know more.
Yeah, I think anyone who is familiar with this topic knows modern Tesla. So, yeah, the largest EV company in the world is the Chinese EV company BYD, and they boosted their production, by 200% in 2022. They compete fiercely with Tesla. I think their business model is a little different. So they not only make, luxury vehicles, but they also make it affordable for people. So, but also it's much cheaper for them to make their vehicles than Tesla. In the competition, they're a little bit ahead. And Tesla is, of course, the second largest EV manufacturer, but also many other companies are, making EV vehicles too. We know that Volkswagen has EV vehicles, General Motors does. They, other than General Motors, we also have Hyundai is a major player, BMW is a major player, Geely Auto Group is a major player, Nissan is also a major player. And, I think what is changing is that these companies are trying different like price and models and what kind of like how luxurious they need to be. Is it, just the way like regular vehicles are not electric vehicles.
Hmm.
Some are made for the suburban mom, some are made for we have like, electric trucks, for example. And so these companies are trying, okay, what exactly works and how can we make it for different users? At the end of the day, all these companies are competing to find the right model. But right now, there is a price war between Tesla and BYD. And Chinese companies are trying to sell their EVs outside of China and find a bigger market. And as demand continues to increase, what's going to like set it apart is, who has the best car, but also who has the best price. And that's, we're going to see how that plays out in the coming years.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that like including BYD and then Dapper also mentioned like BMW, General Motors. At like a decade ago, they are like the traditional car manufacturers, and it's really interesting to see that nowadays they are also putting a lot of effort into like doing all the EV stuff and then investing in the industry. And even though like for like BMW, General Motors, EV is still a really small percentage, but you can notice that they are also trying to get a share in the market and they don't want to lose any of their share in the general like auto industry. So, BYD is important, but I think looking at the car industry as a whole, we can see kind of the trend that every manufacturer, every company is trying to transition into the EV. And I just look up to the BMW website. They have a plan of like making 50% of their car is gonna be EV in the 2030. And now like back in
And that's the entire production, or
yeah, the entire production, the share of all electro vehicle in total delivers.
okay.
Yeah, that's what I say on the website, and it's interesting to see a traditional auto manufacturer have that kind of a plan to transition their company.
Yeah, so what you're saying is so interesting because it's hard for me. I've been rented a Chevy earlier this year. It's not a BMW, obviously, but how hard it was for me to like use it within Chicago. And I'm not sure if that's just an experience that's limited to the Chevy I use. It was a Chevy Bolt, but I would charge it to full and it would only last 4 hours of drive. And I would have to charge it for almost 2 hours. And it was really cold then. And I think these cars don't do as well in the cold. So if they want to make that many vehicles by 2030, we have to see an infrastructure that would support this, and the technology has to be better. But again, I'm not sure if it's different with BMWs and other models. But my experience with the Chevy wasn't as pleasant. So
All right. So I think let's just put some things to perspective. When I was doing the readings, I saw something pretty interesting. It was basically like I mentioned earlier, how EVs are being perceived as facilitating decarbonization, right? Now, the discussion that we are having and the discussion that many people have are basically around vehicles that are for personal use, right? Now, imagine if the government of the United States or any major country decides to electrify the entire fleet of government buses. That would be massive, and that would be something that would require immense amount of rare earth inputs, given the present context, and also would require, like Dapper was saying, immense amount of setting up of energy infrastructure, which would again require rare earths. So yeah, this is just a food for thought that I wanted to leave the listeners with, that it's not only the personal family vehicles that are EV, or that we are putting here for discussion, but on a larger scale, like Dabo and Hugo were mentioning about electric trucks and electric buses. Who knows? We would be having. We already have electric rickshaws, and many rickshaws. Basically, for the listeners who don't know, rickshaws are basically like a smaller, compact, three-tiered vehicles that people use in some of the developing countries.
Nigeria,
So,
not from Nigeria. It's like I
yeah,
can picture it in my head right now, but
yeah,
I've never seen one here. I think
yeah.
America
I don't think
should.
so. America has
Yeah.
the
They're not as
EV
cool. They're not as
rickshaws. All right.
but
So
but yeah, just just going off of what you just said.
yeah.
You mentioned how rare earths are so important in as we like ramp up production. What's interesting? So Ford says the biggest competition are Chinese companies,
Hmm.
but then Ford uses Chinese batteries in the production. So people are like, well, wait a minute. If they're your competition, you also depend on them. That is what makes like the ramping up EV vehicles and the business models that all these companies use very interesting, because we're gonna have to see how the geopolitics plays out. We're going to see how China and US relations plays out in how they depend on each other in making our EV dreams come true.
That's very true. And I think that there are many countries who are trying to form strategic alliances to facilitate rare earths. But it was very interesting to see that many of the car manufacturers and the EV manufacturers also are trying to adopt certain strategies that limit their dependence on the rare earth supply chain and the rare earths.
I also want to go back to what Dapo was saying earlier about the competitions about EV stuff. It's interesting that like I think a couple years ago, pre-COVID, Tesla's was building their factories in China, and the Chinese government and the Shanghai parent government was really welcome of Teslas, and it's interesting to see like now that like America is trying to keep China away from the supply chain as much as possible. Where in China that they will welcome Tesla into their market and everything. So, and I remember that because there was a really funny video that where Elon Musk was dancing on the stage when the factory were finally built and in use. And it's also interesting that a lot of the Chinese official was trying to use that opportunity to criticize the US government as the US always say they have the free trade market and everything, but then the US government is trying to keep China out of the market.
While we're on that topic, we should be mindful of the shareholders and the stakeholders of the companies that we're talking about. For example, BYD is heavily funded by none other than Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway company, and they're a heavy investor in BYD. We should also note that Tesla is barred from China in specific cities, regions, and locations from selling their technology because of the competition. These are considerations in addition to the geopolitics, but also who owns the mines. So we need these rare earths. We have Round Top down in my home state of Texas, which is allegedly the largest for now. It is the largest rare earth deposit in the country. But that isn't the same for all mines, and it's owned by US companies. Some mines here in America are actually owned by Chinese companies. For example, the Thacker Pass mine in Nevada, which is a lithium mine. Lithium is essential also for these EVs. This is not what this series is about, but it's an example. And it was bought out by a Chinese company, and it was owned by a Chinese company. And so it's kind of ironic to even have the resources in the ground of the United States are being owned and profited from and extracted from a company that is owned by a Chinese company. So we have to be mindful of that. There are complexities here that are not on the surface when we talk about these things on the podcast. So for our listeners, please take what we say with a grain of salt and always do your research, and we'll provide most of these resources in the bibliography of the episode.
So basically now we see that there is a lot of complex supply chain issues involved. And I was reading that while countries are trying to formulate strategic alliances with each other, the EV manufacturers are also trying to adapt to deal with this complexity, and they're trying to adopt new technologies so that so as to reduce their dependence on rare earths. Yeah, Christian, would you want to let us know what are your thoughts on that?
So finding alternative resources is difficult to do. And then there's the other alternative, which we don't talk much about. If we are able to manufacture it, then we won't mine it. So if we fabricate it, a mineral, like say, one example that we can fabricate are diamonds for use in technologies and in tools and hardware that we use. And a lot of people don't know that there's diamonds laced in those products, in those metals. The same could be applied here. We could manufacture minerals that replace the rare earths, but we're not there yet. For now, we have to depend on rare earths and extraction and the refining. But the refining is the US's limit there. So sure, we have Round Top down in Texas, and that's great. And that's probably also why there's a lot of refining development down in Texas as well and in the Southwest regions, where most of the major mining activity for not only rare earths but critical minerals is happening. The issue is this takes some time. It takes permitting, it takes regulations, it takes a lot, and getting the social license to operate with the community if they even want the project to be developed in their town. So companies have to go through these loops. They have to jump through these loops before a company is developed. And this problem that we're talking about is not new. It isn't something that just happened last year or 2 years ago. This problem, in the most recent case, with regard to specifically US-China competition, I would say it's been a problem for the last 10 to 8 years that they've been trying to solve between two different presidential administrations, particularly President Trump's administration and President Biden's administration, which are two starkly different administrations with regard to their interest in the development of renewable energy assets, but also those upstream industries that are required for that green energy transition. And so just hold on. The U.S. is taking some time to get there, but we'll get there. I believe so. I'll be going to these conferences down in Arizona next week. I'll be up in Toronto for PDAC at the end of the month. So, and these are the conversations that we're having. Everyone is having these conversations, not just us on the podcast, the biggest conferences, everybody that I talk to, everyone is saying the same thing. So now if we're all on the same page and we're saying the same thing, we need to make the steps and actually solve the problem and help facilitate across industries, not just in industry, but in government, in agencies, in Congress, to help facilitate that so we can reach that green energy transition faster.
That's a good point. I think another thing that we had discussed on the last podcast is how countries with underutilized or relatively unutilized rare earth mineral deposits are also trying to ramp up their production of rare earths, and US and also US's allies, including Australia, India, they are trying to facilitate certain channels for securing the supply of rare earths. But it was also interesting for me because I was reading a Reuters report wherein the report spoke about how the EV manufacturers also over time have gone through various iterations of the product that has over time reduced their dependence on rare earths itself. So it's also very interesting that the R&D that the company is also doing, they are taking note of this contingency and they're trying to incorporate in the product so as to ensure that lesser and lesser and lesser dependence on rare earths is happens in the near future. Tesla and BMW are among the two companies that are doing a good job on that, and in fact, BMW, if I am right, they're not using the permanent magnets with the rare earths in their EV tech. That was an interesting piece of information that I came across.
What is permanent magnet?
I'll take that question. The permanent magnet is the magnet inside of the turbine of the EVs. Sometimes they can be found in the wheels or you see on the Tesla models, it'll be like that little turbine in the back of the car when you take off the shell and the frame. And that is what actually generates the power, charges the battery. So, and let me be clear, permanent magnets have to have rare earth minerals, but not all magnets have rare earth minerals and metals. And not all technologies have permanent magnets. So, but something a little more closer, just food for thought. Generators that we use on our houses or above Walmart, those magnets in there are permanent magnets. They have to be permanent magnets, and those have rare earths in them. So just another application of rare earths. There's one thing I didn't say with regard to that is, to our previous question, was that the refineries and the mine that I mentioned, they're not in production. Like, they're still being developed. So with regard to capacity, it's very limited here in the United States. And where we don't use rare earths, the substitute metals and minerals, we still have to do the same process, which still ironically has the same problems that we're talking about with regard to rare earths. In addition to R&D, companies are actually adopting strategies of vertical integration, particularly BYD and Tesla, who are close competitors with each other, arguably close competitors. They've both adopted vertical integration. So for our listeners, vertical integration is basically the adoption or the acquisition or merger of a company that is further up, so backwards in your supply chain, or forwards of your supply chain. In the case of both of these companies, it would be backwards vertical integration. because they would be acquiring and merging the refining and the mining that precedes the actual manufacturing fabrication for the magnets that we're talking about that require rare earths, or for even the batteries for that require lithium, which again, lithium's not a rare earth. They're often in the same conversation when we talk about EVs.
That's very true. I think even many countries in the European Union and the African Union as well, and India, Australia, they are all trying to grapple with the supply chain challenges, and they are all trying to integrate strategic alliances in such a way so that critical industries, critical infrastructures don't suffer because of dearth of rare earth supply. And I think all of them have planned very, very strategically to ramp up the production and also ensure that strategic alliances are in place so that if things go haywire, at least there is supplemental or complementary support available with them. All right, with this, let's move to the electronic sector. Hugo, can you help us understand how rare earths are being used in the electronic industry, and what does the supply chain look like, and what are the prevalent issues in that regard?
Yeah, yeah, because rare earth have so many unique physical and also chemical properties that no other element can really compare with. They are being used in a lot of applications, in LED lights, in digital camera, lenses on our cell phones, batteries, and everything. So, there's just a bunch of application that is being used in the tools of our modern life today. And a big issue with that is the supply chain or the supply and demand relationship. We kind of mentioned about it in our last episode. China is still a major player in the supply chain. And a big problem with that is today in 2024 that it brings a lot of like political tensions between the US and China, the Western world and China, even that kind of spread concerns that like Beijing will use its dominant positions as a supplier of the rare earth to leverage in like trade war and everything and the geopolitics. So with all that, I think that's also why we are trying to talk about it today, that this is something really concerns the supply chains of rare earth, and because rare earth is really important, there's issue we need to address.
Yeah, I think supply chain issues, more or less, are quite similar in both EVs and electronic industry. The primary reason being the sourcing of materials are predominantly similar in both the cases. And like Christian was mentioning, that how companies are trying to deal with it is A, through vertical integration, but also interestingly, electronic industry in particular has tried to adopt a lot of recycling techniques and technologies that is helping them cope with the supply chain issues. So yeah, I think the trend looks pretty interesting, pretty healthy. And the indicators, like Christian was saying, people are talking about these important issues in conferences, in closed room discussions, and in public forums as well. So there are very smart people, very capable people, and very resourceful people working on these problem statements. And we all hope collectively that these issues get resolved, because rare earths, increasingly so, are becoming important, is because they are also something that is used extensively in clean energy technology, which is again a very, very important facet for us to combat climate change and move towards a very sustainable energy production and energy transition stream. So, yeah, that would be pretty interesting to see. However, Christian, Dapo, and Hugo and I, we were discussing just a while back that it's not all rosy, right? Because these rare earths, while when they are mined, when they are recycled, when they are produced and refined, they have certain environmental repercussions. So let's just try to understand what are those.
Wait, before someone take the questions, I just want to add something to the recycle part of the rare earth. It's really interesting to see that because it is a finite resources. So I think it's interesting to see someone's working into recycling rare earth, and the technology of it is really interesting because I saw a research from the Rice University they were trying to use a 3000 degrees Celsius and also I think about 5500 Fahrenheit to heat a fly ashes in 1 second just to turn that waste into some reusable rare earth. It's just something fascinating for me. And yeah, Christian, you have something to add?
Well, there's a few things. So the hard truth is that, and I have 15 plus years in counting, in industry, in construction, in mining. I've actually been to a recycling plant, not for rare earths, but in outside of Fremont, Ohio. My uncles worked there. It is a very nasty, dirty job, and that's the environmental impact. On the other hand, the technologies that we use for development, for mining, are changing. And we've talked about this before on the podcast. So while we are all impressed by automated self driving Tesla vehicles, yes, that's great. They already have these and they are built and used in mines. So they're built by Caterpillar, which was initially a Chicago based company, and they're used in mines. So these haul trucks carry tons and tons of ore in the back of them without needing a driver. They're fully autonomous. They have their own batteries. They don't emit emissions. These already exist. So these technologies exist in industry where we need those minerals. So that adds to the sustainability and reduces the emissions and the climate impact on those sites in those jobs. So if we can't grow it, we have to mine it. We can't grow rare earth minerals. We have yet to find a replacement that we might be able to manufacture to replace the extraction of rare earth minerals. So in the meanwhile, we still have to do the job of mining the rare earth minerals. And yes, we have to tear up the earth to get to it. However, not every country, not every area that we mine at has the same permitting or the same environmental regulations or labor laws like we do here in the United States, which is why it takes so long, for better and for worse. I would like it to be cut back, and I'm sure a lot of people would like certain permitting times to be reduced, but this is where we are. Whereas in other markets, for example, China, where BYD, they adopt a model of backwards vertical integration and they're able to ramp up quickly. But why is that? Because they don't have the same environmental regulations in those zones, in those sectors, and they have less strict labor laws, which results in more accidents. Like if you look back in the last 5 years, 10 years, the major accidents have all happened in China. And we're not talking like a handful of guys. And in my opinion, losing just one guy in a mine, one mine worker, is too many. But to lose, and I say this because in the mine that I worked at a long time ago, far before my time, the mine manager was lost in the collapse. And so when we'd walk in, we have this saint that's above on the wall of the mine portal, where all our hard hats are hung up on the wall before we go to work. That was gifted to us to look over us, look after us, watch over us as we go to work. In any case, engineering is also different than it was then, and the engineering standards have improved significantly. But the fatal accidents, most of them have happened in China, and we're talking tens to hundreds of mine workers at a time. I think the largest one in the last 2 years was like 60 people that died in a mine accident in a collapse, and that was terrible. I heard about it, and I'm like, I got really angry. So the reality is these are the stakes, but it's the trade-off for the green energy. We don't have to do business in countries or with companies who facilitate or encourage bad practices. We can do them with countries and companies that encourage and only do or only practice good, sustainable mining and construction practices, refining practices. And in that, we can achieve lower death rates as we have in the United States. We can have reclamation and cover up those mines. So that's another part of this is once the mine's done, we don't leave the hole in the ground anymore. That's not allowed here in the United States for any new mine. Once you take over the mine, you have to reclaim it. You have to fill the hole back up, and you have to put the environment back to, and they have measurements for this. You have to reclaim the environment to where it looks as it did before you got there, or so like clean up after yourself, or replace it with something else that increases welfare for the society of all. And, we've talked about that here on this podcast. Dapo and I, better in our backyard. That's exactly what that advocacy group does in Duluth, Minnesota, is they advocate because we have stricter permitting, we have stricter regulations, stricter labor laws, safer mining practices and certifications that we should mine here. One, for, yes, sourcing our minerals and being less dependent on other nations, but also to do it safer, to do it more sustainably, to have a better impact on the environment once we're done. That is what they do. And so they only partner with companies that do that. In addition, we have IRMA, which is IRMA, which is a sustainable mining organization. So companies often, to those companies who have those certifications, because they're required to by government. And if you have those certifications, that means you have the stamp of approval, and that's required for government. And so you can proceed with doing business with those companies. And these companies are vetted by IRMA. Each application is vetted by IRMA, and they have to abide by the values of sustainable mining practices.
All right. So much like in the United States, I think countries are also exerting pressure on each other, whether through diplomatic or trade channels, to actually adopt environmental friendly regulations and environmental friendly standards of mining. I don't know how far those have been successful because of the facts that this Christian just stated a while back. But of course, the situation is definitely getting better, and we hope that the situation gets better with time. With this, we come to the close of our podcast. We hope that our insights around electrical vehicles and electronic industry and rare earth minerals overlap takes you to tangents and helps you explore the various facets of geopolitics, rare earth supply chain, and these critical industries. Take care and have a great week.